The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, June 17th will mark the 5th anniversary of the arrest of Raif Badawi, a human rights activist and writer who created the website Free Saudi Liberal. He is a prisoner of conscience sentenced to 1,000 lashes, 10 years in prison, and a 10-year travel ban for exercising his fundamental right to freedom of expression. He was convicted of violating Saudi Arabia's draconian information technology law and, quote, insulting Islam, end quote. Since his imprisonment in 2012, Raif's case has garnered international attention and generated outrage. For the courage he displayed as a free speech advocate, he has won many awards, including the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Prize in 2014, the Penn Pinter International Writer of Courage Prize, and the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought in 2015. His writings were a breath of fresh air in a country that ranks 168th out of 180 in Reporters Without Borders 2017 World Press Freedom Index. In January 2015, Raif received the first 50 of the 1,000 lashes ordered by the so-called court that sentenced him. Try to imagine what that means, what it would feel like to have someone whip you 50 times in a row, what it would do to your body, how it would cut you up and make you bleed. The lashing was carried out in public in front of a mosque as men stood around and cheered. It was barbaric. A week after the first session of flogging, a doctor advised prison authorities that Raif's wounds had not healed enough for him to undergo the second round of this brutal punishment. To date, the lashings have not continued, but they could resume at any time. Last year, Raif had to resort to a hunger strike to get access to health care. It's been 5 years since he's seen his wife, Ensaf, and his 3 children. They're growing up, and he's missing it because he dared to write what he thought. I am sorry to say that Raif is not an isolated case. Reporters Without Borders has identified another 10 journalists and citizen journalists detained in Saudi Arabia. Walid Abu al-Khair, a prominent human rights defender and Raif's lawyer, was sentenced to 15 years in prison for, and I quote, harming the reputation of the state by communicating with international organizations, end quote, and other supposed crimes like, and I quote, insulting the judiciary and questioning the integrity of judges, end quote, and disobeying the ruler and seeking to remove his legitimacy. Many other human rights defenders are in prison for doing things like setting up human rights organizations without permission and calling for protests. All of the founders of the Saudi Civil and Political Rights Association have been wrongfully put on trial or imprisoned. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States, but we also know that Saudi Arabia's human rights record is terrible. According to our own State Department, and I quote, the most important human rights problems include citizens' lack of ability and legal means to choose their government, restrictions on universal rights such as freedom of expression, including on the Internet, and the freedoms of assembly, association, movement, and religion, and pervasive gender discrimination and lack of equal rights that affect most aspects of women's lives, end quote. That is not exactly a short list, Mr. Speaker. Yet the President of the United States just traveled to Saudi Arabia without saying a single word in public about human rights, without speaking up even once on behalf of all the people who are wasting away in jails because they chose to defend a client, advocate for minorities, or call for reform. The President wants to buy cooperation in the fight against extremism with a $110 billion arms deal. But Saudi Arabia will not achieve security or stability by repressing peaceful dissent. On the contrary, repression creates the conditions for extremism. Haven't we learned that lesson by now? Senator John McCain, a former prisoner of war, understands what the President does not. We in the United States have long believed moral concerns must be an essential part of our foreign policy, not a departure from it. Our values are our great strength and greatest treasure. We have been the country that saw the world as it was and made it better. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm here today in the best tradition of the United States to call for the immediate and unconditional release of Raif Badawi, who must be allowed to be reunited with his wife and children in Canada. And I call also for all of the other prisoners of conscience in Saudi Arabia to be released. The United States must not be silent while people sit in prison for exercising their most basic human rights. Thank you, and I yield back my time.